Good evening, and congratulations, you've chosen boredom on purpose. Tonight you're about to discover why being a pirate's cabin boy was less ahoy matey and more please don't kill me today. You can almost smell the rotting fish guts splattered across weathered dock planks, hear the creak of ship masts swaying against a blood orange sunset, and feel that strange mix of salt spray and human desperation hanging thick in the harbor air. You're 8 years old, maybe 9, nobody's keeping track, and you're about to learn that Hollywood lied about everything. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how this strange little community spans the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're crouched behind a stack of moldy grain sacks on the Bristol docks, 1715, watching your mother argue with a man whose face looks like weathered leather. The conversation ends with coins changing hands and your mother walking away without looking back. That's it. No tearful goodbye, no promise to return. You've just been sold, though the man calls it apprenticeship, when he grabs your wrist with fingers that smell like tobacco and dried blood. The ship looming before you isn't the majestic vessel from storybooks. The Revenge, what an original name, lists slightly to port her hull, patched with mismatched planks that tell stories of cannon fire and rough seas. Barnacles crust her waterline like maritime acne, and you can see actual holes plugged with tar and old sailcloth. This floating coffin will be your home, assuming you survive the first week. Captain Black Sam Bellamy, though his beard is more gray than black, looks you up and down like he's buying livestock. Pirates, you quickly learn, preferred orphans and unwanted children because dead parents don't file missing person reports. The ideal cabin boy had no relatives asking questions, no connections to trace, no one who'd organize rescue attempts. You fit perfectly expendable, replaceable, forgettable. The recruitment process was brutally efficient. Port towns crawled with abandoned children, victims of plague poverty or simple parental indifference. Pirates swept through these harbors like human traffickers, selecting boys young enough to be molded, but strong enough for manual labor. Some captains raided coastal villages specifically for children, burning homes and dragging screaming kids to their ships. Others simply waited at taverns, buying unwanted sons from desperate families, drowning in debt. Your new apprenticeship contract, a joke since you can't read, binds you to 7 years of service. 7 years might as well be 7 centuries when you're 8 years old. The document, written in flowing script you'll never decipher, essentially makes you property. You have no rights, no wages, no protection under any law. If Captain Bellamy decides to sell you in Port Royal or use you as shark bait, that's his prerogative. The psychological manipulation begins immediately. "You're lucky we found you," growls the quartermaster, a man missing 3 fingers and most of his teeth. "Street rats like you usually die of plague before 10. This becomes the constant refrain. You should be grateful for this floating hell because the alternative was supposedly worse. They paint pictures of children starving in gutters, freezing in winter storms, or being pressed into His Majesty's Navy, where conditions were arguably worse than pirate ships. Historians still argue whether most cabin boys were truly kidnapped or simply abandoned by families who couldn't feed them. The truth probably varies by case, but the result was identical children torn from everything familiar and thrust into an adult world of violence and exploitation. The golden age of piracy coincided with widespread economic hardship across Europe and the Caribbean, creating perfect conditions for this particular form of child trafficking. Your first night aboard, you meet Tommy, the current cabin boy, who's been serving for 2 years. At 11, he looks ancient, gap-toothed, scarred, and possessed of that 1,000-yard stare you'll develop within months. "Don't cry," he whispers, as tears stream down your face. "They beat you worse if you cry." His advice comes from experience. Fresh welts crisscross his back like a roadmap of recent mistakes. The ship's hierarchy places you at the absolute bottom, below even the newest crew member. You exist to serve everyone else's needs while having none of your own acknowledged. Your childhood officially ends the moment you step aboard. There are no games, no play, no concept of age-appropriate treatment. You're simply the smallest member of a floating criminal enterprise, expected to contribute or die trying. As the anchor chain rattles up and Bristol Harbor shrinks behind you, reality sets in with the weight of those iron links. You're not going home tomorrow, next week, or next year. The life you knew, however harsh, is gone forever, replaced by something far worse. Welcome to your new existence as a pirate's cabin boy, where survival itself becomes your greatest daily achievement. The ship's belly welcomes you with the embrace of a tomb. Down here, 3 levels below the main deck, sunlight becomes a distant memory, and fresh air transforms into a luxury you'll spend months craving. Your new bedroom, if you can call a space, smaller than most modern closets, a bedroom sits wedged between the ship's powder magazine and a collection of water barrels that leak steadily onto the already rotting floorboards. Tommy leads you through this maritime maze by the light of a single tallow candle that flickers with every roll of the ship. "This is where cabin boys sleep," he announces, gesturing to a hammock strung so close to the gunpowder barrels that you could reach out and touch the rough hemp sacking. The irony isn't lost on you, even at 8 years old. You're literally sleeping on top of enough explosives to send the entire ship to the bottom of the Atlantic, yet you're not allowed to make a sound that might disturb the crew above. The powder magazine holds the ship's most valuable and dangerous cargo barrels of black powder cannonballs stacked in neat pyramids and boxes of musket shot that rattle ominously with each wave. Pirates treated their ammunition better than their cabin boys, wrapping the gunpowder in oiled cloth and checking it daily for moisture. You meanwhile get a threadbare blanket that smells like the previous cabin boy, who Tommy casually mentions died of fever last month. Your hammock hangs so low that sitting up means banging your head on the deck beams above. The space between your nose and the ceiling measures exactly 18 inches. You'll memorize this distance during countless sleepless nights. The wood above your head bears the carved initials of previous cabin boys: JW 1709, TB 1712, RS 1714. You wonder if they survived their service, or if these scratches serve as their only epitaphs. The rats discover you before you finish your first night. These aren't the cute, clean mice from children's stories. These are ship rats, massive creatures with teeth like needles and attitudes like pirates themselves. They've grown fat and fearless from months at sea, treating the ship as their personal kingdom. They scurry across your face while you sleep nest in your hair and steal whatever food scraps you manage to hide. One particularly bold rat, which Tommy has named Captain Whiskers, regularly steals entire hardtack biscuits and drags them into the bilge. Water becomes your constant companion down here, but not in a refreshing way. Seawater seeps through the ship's hull joints, creating a perpetual drip, drip, drip that drives you slowly insane. The sound echoes off the cramped walls, mixing with the groan of ship timbers and the scratch of rat claws on wood. Your hammock grows damp within hours, and everything you own, which isn't much, develops that distinctive smell of wet wood and mildew that will cling to you for years. The bilge water, that festering soup of seawater vomit and human waste that collects in the ship's lowest point, creates its own ecosystem of horror. Historians still argue whether the smell or the rats presented the greater health hazard, but most cabin boys didn't live long enough to develop informed opinions on the matter. The stench rises through the floorboards like an unholy incense, making every breath a conscious decision to continue living. Your personal space consists of whatever fits in a single wooden crate, one spare shirt, a pair of torn breeches, and a cup for drinking whatever liquid they decide to give you. The crate also serves as your chair desk and dining table, assuming you're lucky enough to eat somewhere besides standing up. Privacy doesn't exist. The entire ship can hear you breathing, crying, or whispering prayers to whatever gods might listen to the pleas of enslaved children. The ship's motion affects everything down here. What seems like gentle rocking on deck becomes violent, lurching in the depths. Your hammock swings like a pendulum, gone mad, slamming you against barrels and beams with each wave. Sleep becomes a skill you must learn rather than a natural function, how to wedge yourself into the hammock, how to brace for the ship's rolls, how to breathe despite the suffocating air. Temperature control ranges from impossible to torturous. During tropical days, the ship's belly becomes a floating oven, trapping heat and humidity until you feel like you're drowning in your own sweat. Caribbean nights bring blessed cooling, but winter storms in the North Atlantic turn your quarters into an icebox where breath freezes and fingers go numb. The single blanket they provide, assuming you get one, offers about as much warmth as wet paper. The darkness becomes absolute when your candle burns out. Unlike the romantic notion of gentle ship lanterns casting warm glows down here, you experience darkness so complete that you can't see your own hands. This blackness plays tricks on your mind, making you imagine shapes moving in corners and sounds that might be rats or might be the ghosts of previous cabin boys. You learn to navigate by touch, counting steps between your hammock and the ladder, memorizing every barrel and beam. Your fellow residents include not just rats, but an entire community of vermin. Cockroaches the size of your thumb scuttle across everything you own, carrying diseases and laying eggs in your belongings. Weevils infest any food you try to save, creating moving lumps in your hardtack that crunch when you bite down. Lice take up residence in your hair and clothes, creating an itching sensation that never stops and open sores that never heal. This becomes your world, a floating prison cell where you're buried alive while still breathing. Every night as you swing in that damp hammock, surrounded by enough explosives to level a small town, you understand that your childhood died the moment you descended into this maritime tomb. The ship's bell clangs at 4 in the morning, dragging you from whatever restless sleep you managed to steal. Your body hasn't adjusted to the constant motion it may never adjust, and your stomach churns as you stumble from your hammock onto legs that feel like overcooked noodles. The fun begins immediately because pirates don't believe in gentle wake-up calls or gradual transitions into consciousness. You have 30 seconds to climb that ladder and present yourself on deck, ready to work until you collapse. Move your worthless hide, boy. The quartermaster's voice cuts through the pre-dawn darkness like a rusty blade. His name is Jeremiah Crossed, though everyone calls him Iron Jaw because half his face got rebuilt with metal after a cannon misfired. Iron Jaw has made tormenting cabin boys his personal art form, and you're his newest canvas. He assigns your daily tasks with the enthusiasm of someone planning a particularly creative torture session. Your day begins with swabbing the deck, not just cleaning it, but scrubbing every plank until the wood shows no trace of yesterday's blood vomit or whatever else the crew deposited during their evening festivities. The mop weighs nearly as much as you do, and the deck stretches endlessly in all directions. Pirates track dirt mud and worse across those planks with the dedication of particularly messy toddlers, then stand around criticizing your cleaning technique while drinking rum and placing bets on how long you'll last. The scrub brush becomes an extension of your hand, its stiff bristles wearing your palms raw within hours. You learn to grip it differently to avoid the worst blisters, but new calluses simply replace old wounds in an endless cycle of minor agonies. The lye soap they give you when they bother giving you soap at all burns any cuts on your hands and leaves your skin feeling like dried leather. Historians still argue whether this brutal cleaning regimen served any practical purpose beyond humiliating the cabin boy, but most evidence suggests pure sadism. Serving the officers their meals requires navigating a minefield of arbitrary rules and violent consequences. Captain Bellamy takes his breakfast at precisely 7 bells, his eggs cooked exactly 3 minutes, his rum heated but not boiling. Get any detail wrong, and you'll spend the morning tied to the rigging while seabirds use you for target practice. The captain's cabin boy from 2 ships ago made the mistake of serving cold coffee. They keel-hauled him, dragging his body under the ship's hull until the barnacles stripped most of his skin off. You carry steaming bowls of slop from the galley to various officers, balancing on a deck that pitches and rolls like a bucking horse. Spilling food brings immediate punishment, 20 lashes, with a rope's end, or getting dunked in a barrel of seawater until you nearly drown, or being forced to eat whatever you spilled off the deck, including the splinters and tar. The cook-a-man they call Maggot Mike, for reasons you don't want to contemplate, takes special pleasure in giving you scalding hot dishes to carry, knowing that dropping them means pain, while holding them means burned fingers. Boot polishing becomes an exercise in futility and humiliation. Pirates wear boots caked with mud blood and substances you can't identify, then demand you make them shine like mirrors. You spend hours with blackening paste and rags trying to restore leather that's been soaked in seawater, baked in tropical sun, and stomped through countless tavern brawls. The moment you finish one pair, another pirate drops his boots at your feet with a grunt that clearly means now. Rope work provides endless opportunities for failure and punishment. You're expected to splice lines, coil cables, and maintain rigging with the skill of a seasoned sailor, despite being a child who'd never seen a ship before last week. Every knot must be perfect, every coil precisely arranged, every splice strong enough to hold during storms. Mess up a line that breaks during battle, and you'll find yourself swimming with whatever's left of your limbs still attached. The ship's laundry becomes your personal hell on wash days. Pirates generate dirty clothes with supernatural efficiency, creating piles of garments so foul they could probably qualify as biological weapons. You scrub these rags in buckets of seawater, using soap that's basically solidified pig fat mixed with wood ash. The clothes never get truly clean, just wet and slightly less offensive. Your hands crack and bleed from the harsh soap and constant moisture creating wounds that sting with every movement. Punishment comes in creative varieties that would impress medieval torture specialists. Simple mistakes earn you rope burns across your back, administered with scientific precision to maximize pain without permanently disabling their investment. More serious offenses like talking back or crying too loudly result in more elaborate consequences. They might tie you to the bowsprit during storms, letting waves crash over you until hypothermia sets in, or they'll hang you by your wrists from the rigging, leaving you there until circulation fails and your hands turn purple. The cat-o'-nine-tails, that charming multi-tailed whip designed specifically for maritime discipline, becomes intimately familiar with your back. Each tail ends in a knot, creating 9 separate points of impact with every stroke. The quartermaster administers these beatings with the casual efficiency of someone brushing their teeth, counting out lashes, while discussing dinner plans with nearby crew members. 20 lashes for spilling food, 30 for falling asleep on watch, 50 for attempting to hide food for later. Your hands transform into maps of accumulated damage rope, burns cuts from broken glass, splinter wounds from rough wood, and chemical burns from cleaning supplies. These injuries never heal properly because there's no time for recovery. Tomorrow brings the same tasks, the same opportunities for new wounds layered over old scars. You develop a tolerance for pain that would frighten adults learning to work through injuries that would send modern children to emergency rooms. The psychological warfare proves as brutal as the physical abuse. Pirates understand that breaking your spirit makes you more compliant than merely breaking your body. They create hope, promising shore leaves that never come, suggesting your service might end early for good behavior, then crush that hope with deliberate cruelty. They'll let you rest for 5 minutes, just long enough to believe the work might be done, before assigning 6 new tasks that must be completed before sunset. Every order comes with the implied threat of violence. Every mistake carries consequences that extend far beyond the immediate punishment. You're not just serving breakfast or swabbing decks. You're surviving moment by moment in a world where your life has less value than the rope they use to beat you. The galley bell rings 3 times a day, and each chime sends a Pavlovian shiver through your increasingly bony frame. Mealtime aboard a pirate ship sounds like it should offer some relief from that endless labor, but you're about to discover that eating becomes just another form of torture when you're at the absolute bottom of the food chain. The crew gets fed first, then the officers, then the cook's pet rats, and finally, if anything remains, the cabin boy might get whatever scraps haven't already spoiled or walked away on their own. Your first glimpse of ship's rations comes courtesy of Maggot Mike, who earned his nickname through his philosophical approach to food preparation. If it's not actually moving, it's probably safe to eat. He ladles what might generously be called stew into wooden bowls, though the distinction between meat vegetables and unidentifiable floating objects remains deliberately unclear. The broth has that special rainbow sheen that comes from rancid fat and chunks of something that might once have been beef bob, alongside what you desperately hope are overcooked onions. Hardtack becomes your primary food group, those ship's biscuits that could double as building materials in an emergency. Fresh hardtack is merely rock hard. Aged hardtack develops its own ecosystem. You learn to tap each biscuit against the table before eating, listening for the hollow sound that indicates weevil infestation. The little white grubs boring through your bread provide extra protein, though they add an unfortunate crunch to every bite. Some cabin boys develop the skill of eating in complete darkness, reasoning that what you can't see can't disgust you quite as much. Water aboard ship exists in a state of perpetual questionability. The barrels that store your drinking water also house algae bacteria and occasionally small dead creatures that wandered in during the last port call. The water turns green within weeks of leaving harbor, developing that distinctive smell of organic decay mixed with desperation. Pirates combat this by adding rum to everything they drink, not for fun, but because alcohol kills some of the microscopic horrors trying to colonize their intestines. As cabin boy, you get the dregs of the rum barrel mixed with the dregs of the water barrel, creating a cocktail that tastes like regret and smells like low tide. Salt pork represents the crew's main protein source, though calling it pork requires considerable imagination. These chunks of preserved meat spend months soaking in brine barrels, transforming into something with the texture of leather and the flavor of concentrated salt. The preservation process involves so much sodium that eating salt pork without adequate water can literally kill you through dehydration. You learn to suck on pieces for hours, extracting whatever nutrition you can, while your body screams for fresh water that doesn't exist. The ship's supply chain operates on principles that would horrify modern food safety inspectors. Provisions loaded in port might have been sitting in warehouses for months, already spoiled before they ever reached the ship. Pirates shopped for food the same way they shopped for everything else, by stealing it, which meant no quality control beyond can we carry it without dying immediately. Barrels of flour might be more maggot than grain casks of wine, might be more vinegar than alcohol, and wheels of cheese might be more mold than dairy. Scurvy stalks every long voyage like a patient predator, and cabin boys make particularly vulnerable prey. This vitamin C deficiency starts subtly loose teeth, bleeding gums, mysterious bruises that appear overnight. Your gums begin to pull away from your teeth, creating bloody gaps that make eating even ship's rations an agony. Old wounds reopen spontaneously, your legs develop painful swelling, and your skin takes on that distinctive pallor that marks you as scurvy's next victim. Historians still argue whether pirates understood scurvy's connection to diet, but most captains attributed the disease to bad air or divine punishment for their sins. The cure, fresh fruits and vegetables, remained largely unknown or ignored, partly because fresh food spoiled quickly, and partly because pirates preferred spending their limited cargo space on items that could be sold or traded. Your health matters less than the next barrel of rum or chest of silver coins. The psychological impact of constant hunger affects everything you do. Your body begins consuming its own muscle tissue, leaving you weaker each day despite the never-ending physical demands. Simple tasks become monumental challenges when your blood sugar crashes and your body runs on pure adrenaline. Concentration becomes impossible when your stomach cramps demand more attention than whatever officer is shouting orders at you. You develop the survival skills of a scavenger, learning to identify which crew members might leave edible scraps and which officers occasionally show mercy to starving children. Cookie crumbs become treasures worth fighting over, and you'll risk severe punishment to steal a single apple from the officers' or private stores. Your moral compass adjusts to circumstances. Theft becomes justified when the alternative is starvation, and you learn to lie convincingly about food you've never actually stolen. The cook's table scraps provide your most reliable meals, though scraps might be too generous a term for the mixture of burned bits, dropped food, and actual garbage that gets swept into your bowl. You eat fish bones, potato peels, and the crusty remains from cooking pots with the gratitude of someone who understands that tomorrow might bring even less. Your taste buds adapt to flavors that would have disgusted you weeks ago, and your stomach learns to extract nutrition from substances that barely qualify as food. Night raids on the ship's stores become acts of desperate rebellion. You learn which barrels can be opened quietly, which sacks of grain might spare a handful without anyone noticing, and how to time your theft for maximum invisibility. Getting caught means severe punishment, but the risk becomes acceptable when hunger gnaws at your stomach like a living thing demanding satisfaction. Your body shrinks visibly as weeks pass, clothes hanging loose on a frame that's consuming itself to survive. Your face takes on that hollow-eyed look of chronic malnutrition, and your energy levels drop to the minimum required for basic survival. You move like an old man despite being a child, conserving every calorie for essential functions while your growth stops entirely. The irony cuts deep. You're surrounded by the ocean's bounty, yet starving on a ship that could theoretically fish for food. Pirates prefer raiding to fishing, and the skills required to catch clean and prepare seafood seem beyond most crews' capabilities. You watch dolphins playing in the ship's wake while your stomach cramps from hunger, understanding that you're dying of starvation while floating on top of an endless food source that might as well be on another planet. The sun disappears behind the horizon like a dying ember, and darkness wraps around the ship with the embrace of something hungry. This is when the real horror begins, not the physical abuse or starvation you've learned to endure, but the psychological torment that comes with the night watch stories. The crew gathers around flickering lanterns, passing bottles of rum, and sharing tales that would make grown men weep, while you huddle in whatever shadow might hide you from their attention. Tell the boy about little Jack, suggests Iron Jaw, his metal-plated smile, catching the lamplight in ways that make your stomach clench. The crew murmurs approval because they know exactly which story he means, the one about the cabin boy who served on this very ship just 2 years ago. Little Jack was 10, maybe 11, with hair so blonde it looked white in sunlight, and a stutter that made the crew laugh when he tried to speak. He made the mistake of hiding food in his hammock, saving hardtack for later when the hunger got too bad. Found him face down in the bilge water, continues Iron Jaw, his voice dropping to that theatrical whisper that storytellers use when they want to make sure every word cuts deep. Rats had been at him for hours before we noticed he was missing. Could have been an accident. Boy was always clumsy, always falling down them stairs. But Blackbeard's crew was known for dealing with thieves permanent-like. The implication hangs in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Little Jack didn't just fall down those stairs. The stories multiply like diseases, each one featuring a cabin boy who met some terrible fate. There's the tale of Skinny Pete, who got caught stealing rum and found himself sewn into a sailcloth bag with a cannonball for company before being tossed overboard. The crew swears they can still hear his screams on quiet nights when the wind dies down and the waves lap against the hull with unusual gentleness. Then there's the story of Tommy the Rat, not your Tommy, but another boy who served on Captain Kidd's ship and made the mistake of trying to escape when they docked in Port Royal. Keel-hauled him twice, explains Maggot Mike, wiping his hands on a rag that's seen better decades. First time was just to teach him a lesson about running. Second time was to make sure he learned it permanent. Keel hauling involves tying a rope around someone's legs and dragging them under the ship's hull from bow to stern. The barnacles growing on the ship's bottom act like hundreds of tiny knives, stripping flesh and clothing with equal efficiency. Most people don't survive one keel hauling. Nobody survives two. The crew takes particular pleasure in stories about cabin boys who died from their own mistakes, cautionary tales wrapped in entertainment value. There's Red Sam, who fell asleep on watch and tumbled from the crow's nest, his body making a sound like a melon hitting cobblestones when it struck the deck. Black Tom, who got his hand caught in the anchor chain and chose to cut it off rather than go down with the ship, except he bled out before they could stop the bleeding. Each story comes with vivid details about the sound of breaking bones, the color of blood on wooden planks, and the exact expression on the victim's face when they realized death was coming. Historians still argue whether these tales served as genuine warnings or simply provided entertainment for bored sailors, but the psychological effect on cabin boys was undeniably devastating. Every story reinforced the same message: you are expendable, your life has no value, and death lurks around every corner, waiting for the slightest mistake. The crew's laughter at your obvious terror only emphasizes how much they enjoy watching you suffer. Of course, not all cabin boys die from accidents, adds Jeremiah Crossed, studying your face in the lamplight like he's reading a particularly interesting book. Some just disappear. Take young William from Captain Hornigold's crew. One morning he was there, next morning he wasn't. Never found a body, never found any sign of struggle. Just gone like he never existed at all. The implication that crew members sometimes murder cabin boys for sport hangs unspoken but clearly understood. The ghost stories blend seamlessly with the murder stories, creating a supernatural mythology around previous cabin boys who allegedly haunt the ship. You hear about ghostly children who appear in the rigging during storms, pointing toward hidden reefs or safe harbors. There's the phantom cabin boy who rings the ship's bell at midnight, warning of approaching danger. Most terrifying of all is the story of the bloody cabin boy who appears to sleeping crew members and whispers the names of those destined to die before the next full moon. Your own Tommy contributes to this psychological warfare, though you suspect he's been ordered to frighten you rather than acting from personal malice. He tells you about the voices he hears in the bilge water, previous cabin boys calling his name, begging him to join them in their watery grave. He describes dreams where dead children visit him, showing wounds that mirror the punishments he's received from the crew. Whether these dreams are real or fabricated, they serve their purpose. You sleep even less than your already minimal rest periods allow. The stories evolve to include increasingly creative methods of death. There's the cabin boy who got locked in the ship's hold with a leak, drowning slowly as water rose around him. Another who was tied to the mast during a lightning storm, his body serving as a conductor for the electrical discharge that killed him instantly. The tale of the boy who was forced to eat gunpowder as punishment for stealing food, his stomach exploding when he tried to drink water afterward, a story that's probably physically impossible but psychologically effective. Sleep becomes a battlefield where these stories replay in endless variations. You lie in your hammock listening to the ship's creaks and groans, wondering if each sound might be the footsteps of a ghostly cabin boy or the approach of a crew member with murder on his mind. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every whisper of wind through the rigging might carry the voice of a dead child, warning you about your own approaching doom. The crew's timing is deliberately calculated. They save the worst stories for nights when storms approach or when you've made mistakes that day. They want you lying awake in terror, understanding that your death would provide entertainment rather than tragedy. They want you to know that when you die, not if, but when you'll become just another cautionary tale told to the next cabin boy who takes your place. These stories achieve their intended effect. You understand completely that your life hangs by a thread thinner than spider silk, and that thread could snap at any moment, for any reason or no reason at all. The storm hits on a Tuesday morning in your third month aboard the Revenge, though you've long since stopped keeping track of days or weeks or anything resembling normal time. The sky turns that particular shade of green-black that means trouble, and the wind begins speaking in voices that sound almost human. You're scrubbing blood from yesterday's flogging off the deck planks when the first wave crashes over the bow, sending you sprawling across timber that's become as slippery as ice. Captain Bellamy emerges from his cabin with that look pirates get when they realize their floating coffin might actually become a coffin today. He starts shouting orders that get lost in the wind, gesturing wildly at sails that need adjusting and ropes that need tying and a dozen other tasks that require more crew members than the ship currently possesses. You scramble to help, knowing that survival depends on everyone working together, but also knowing that cabin boys typically get blamed when things go wrong regardless of their actual contributions. The ship pitches forward into a wave trough that seems bottomless, then rockets upward toward a wave crest that looks tall enough to have its own weather system. Your stomach relocates somewhere behind your spine as the vessel hangs suspended for a moment that lasts forever, then crashes down with enough force to rattle your teeth loose. Water pours across the deck like a small ocean looking for a new home, carrying away anything not nailed down, including several crew members who grab desperately for whatever handholds they can find. Tommy disappears sometime during the second hour of the storm. One moment he's beside you, trying to secure a loose barrel. The next moment, he's simply gone, swept overboard by a wave, or knocked unconscious by flying debris, or claimed by whatever maritime gods demand tribute from children. You search for him between waves, calling his name over wind that screams louder than any human voice, but the ocean has swallowed him as efficiently as it swallows everything else that falls into its hungry mouth. The ship begins taking on water faster than the pumps can remove it, and you find yourself assigned to bucket duty in the ship's hold, that familiar basement where you've spent so many miserable nights. Now it's filling with seawater that sloshes back and forth, with each wave creating a miniature ocean inside the ship's belly. You bail water with a bucket that seems to have holes in it, fighting a battle against mathematics and physics that you cannot possibly win. Iron Jaw appears beside you in the hold, his metal face reflecting the lamplight in ways that make him look like some mechanical demon risen from nautical hell. "Ship's going down, boy," he announces with the casual tone someone might use to discuss the weather. "Captain's already lowered the boats for the crew. Question is, what do we do with you?" The way he asks the question suggests he's already decided on an answer that doesn't involve your continued existence. The conversation that follows reveals the true nature of your relationship with these men. Pirates operate under codes and traditions that treat cabin boys as cargo rather than crew members. When ships sink, valuable cargo gets saved first, then crew members, then whatever space remains might accommodate a cabin boy if the crew feels particularly charitable. Your 3 months of service, your loyalty, your willingness to endure every humiliation and beating, none of it earns you a place in a lifeboat when space becomes precious. "Nothing personal, understand," Iron Jaw continues, though his tone suggests he's enjoying this conversation more than any conversation should be enjoyed. "Just business. Boats hold maybe 12 men if we pack tight. We got 14 crew, plus officers, plus whatever supplies we can grab. Simple mathematics says somebody gets left behind, and cabin boys don't get votes in democratic decisions." You realize with crystalline clarity that your entire existence aboard this ship has been temporary by design. Pirates don't invest in cabin boys because cabin boys are expendable resources, like gunpowder or rope or hardtack biscuits. When supplies run low, you eliminate the least essential items first. Your months of suffering haven't earned you humanity in their eyes. You remain property to be discarded when convenient. The ship lifts heavily to starboard, and water begins pouring through gaps in the hull that sound like waterfalls in reverse. You can hear shouting from above as crew members lower boats and argue over who deserves seats and who gets left behind to die. These discussions apparently concluded quickly regarding your fate, since nobody bothered coming below to collect you before abandoning ship. Historians still argue whether pirate codes typically included provisions for cabin boys during emergencies, but the evidence suggests most captains treated children as acceptable losses when survival required difficult choices. Maritime law offered no protection for cabin boys, and their families, assuming they had families, possessed no legal recourse for deaths at sea. You could disappear completely, and the only record would be a line crossed out in the ship's log if anyone bothered maintaining logs during emergencies. The water reaches your waist now, and the ship's death throes create sounds like a massive animal breathing its last breaths. Metal creaks against wood, snaps against rope, and rope tears under pressures it was never designed to withstand. The familiar hammock where you've spent so many miserable nights floats past like a funeral shroud carrying away the last remnants of what passed for home in this floating hell. You discover something interesting about facing death at 9 years old. It feels almost anticlimactic after months of expecting it daily. The terror you felt during those bedtime stories about previous cabin boys seems distant now, replaced by a strange calm that might be resignation or might be shock. Death becomes just another order you're expected to follow, another task assigned by men who view your life as less valuable than the rope they use to tie knots. The irony strikes you as water rises toward your chest. You're drowning in the same ship's belly where you've spent countless nights wishing for death to end your suffering. All those prayers for escape are being answered in the most literal way possible, though divine intervention apparently comes with a sense of humor darker than the ocean depths, waiting to claim you. The last thing you see before the water closes over your head is your wooden crate floating away, carrying your few possessions toward whatever afterlife awaits cabin boys who die without names, without families, without anyone to remember they ever existed. Your story ends not with treasure or glory or adventure, but with a simple mathematical equation that values adult pirates over enslaved children when lifeboat space runs short. You disappear beneath waves that care nothing for your age, your suffering, or your dreams of someday seeing home again. The ocean swallows you as completely as it swallowed Tommy, adding your small bones to a collection that spans centuries of forgotten children who learned too late that pirate ships are floating graves where childhood goes to die. The storm passes by morning, leaving behind calm seas and clear skies that mock the violence of the night before. The surviving crew members, if any survive, will tell stories in taverns about the great storm that claimed their ship, but your name won't appear in those tales. Cabin boys don't rate mentions in survival stories. You become just another casualty in adventures that were never really yours to begin with. Your legacy consists of empty space, where someone once existed, a missing hammock in a sunken ship's belly, and perhaps a scratched initial in wood that's now drifting toward ocean depths where sunlight never reaches. The treasure you sought was survival itself, and like most treasures in pirate stories, it remained forever, just beyond reach. The waves grow gentle now, like a lullaby sung by mothers. You barely remember washing away the pain and fear and hunger that defined your brief existence. The ocean holds you close in its endless embrace, and for the first time in months, you finally rest without fear of tomorrow's orders, tomorrow's beatings, tomorrow's struggles to simply exist in a world that never wanted you. Sleep comes easily now, deeper and more peaceful than any rest you found in that damp hammock surrounded by gunpowder and rats. The ship's bell no longer rings to wake you. The crew's shouts no longer demand your attention, and the endless cycle of work and punishment finally ends in the most permanent way possible. The water grows warmer somehow, or perhaps you're simply growing colder, and consciousness fades like candlelight in an ocean breeze. Your story joins the countless others, lost beneath waves that remember nothing and forgive everything. another brief flicker of childhood extinguished by men who mistook cruelty for strength and death for adventure. And somewhere far above, seabirds circle over empty waters where a ship used to float their cries, the only eulogy for a child whose name was never worth remembering. The ocean holds many secrets in its darkest depths, but perhaps none more tragic than the small bones of children who dreamed of adventure and found only suffering. Tonight's tale reminds us that history's heroes often cast long shadows, and sometimes the most forgotten stories deserve the most remembering. Let the gentle rhythm of waves against distant shores carry you toward peaceful dreams, where cabin boys finally find the rest that eluded them in life, and childhood's innocence remains forever protected from the cruel mathematics of survival at sea.